Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you to the organizers for accepting our paper. The inhabitants of 4th and 5th century Britain witnessed dramatic changes due to the withdrawal of Roman authority, the arrival of migrants from both continental Europe and other portions of Britain, and from climatic changes and corresponding population decline. Northumbria was one of the largest kingdoms of early medieval Britain that emerged out of this tumultuous period by the 7th century. Now, the Leverhulme Trust-funded People and Place, the Making of the Kingdom of Northumbria project, is a 3-year investigation at Durham University led by Sarah Semple and co-investigators Becky Gowan, Janet Montgomery, and Andrew Millard, with Sue Harrington and myself as the current research associates on the project. The project is charting the entirety of the burial record of Northumbria at its greatest extent, and subjecting the burials and cemeteries to a variety of scientific and spatial analyses to investigate the formation and development of the kingdom. The project builds on recent advances in early medieval cemetery studies that have yielded refined chronologies, new ideas on mobility and migration, and better understandings of health, diet, and well-being. Today, I will present the aims and objectives of this ongoing project, and as well as some preliminary findings. By the 7th century, what today is southern Scotland and northern England emerged as the Kingdom of Northumbria after the unification of the earlier kingdoms of Bernicia and Deira. At its greatest extent, it may have stretched from the north to the Irish Seas, and from the Firth of Forth in the north to the Humber Estuary in the south. Northumbria was located along the previous northern Roman military frontier, with the Antonine Wall marking the northern boundary of our study region, and Hadrian's Wall roughly bisecting the kingdom. Much of what we know of the history of the early medieval period derives from the writings of the Venerable Bede, as well as Gildas, and, of course, important archaeological sites such as Yevering, Bamborough, Lindisfarne, West Heslerton, and the twin monasteries of Monk Wearmouth and Jarrow. Key questions remain on the emergence of the kingdom: who the inhabitants and communities in Northumbria were, what was the effect of migration and Roman withdrawal on sociocultural lifeways in the region. From the archaeological evidence, it is apparent there are regional differences and similarities reflecting in this area in the post-Roman period, which was fluid in terms of ethnicities, divisions, territories, and material culture. Now, People and Place is using 3 strands of research to investigate the development of the kingdom. Firstly, we are cataloging every burial within the study region dating from approximately 300 to 800 CE. And we're constructing a unique biography of every burial, containing a variety of data points, including but not limited to the size and shape of the graves or cremations, the orientation and alignment of the burials, the presence of skeletal material, and if it is present, was the age, sex, gender, and date of that skeletal material, the presence and types of grave goods, and if the burial is primarily deposited or secondarily located in an antecedent monument. Now, a third research associate starting this autumn will conduct scientific analysis of a sampling of the skeletal evidence, focusing on examining health, diet, and status of individuals based on osteological and isotopic analysis. This research will hopefully yield key data on migration and mobility of individuals within our data set. Now, finally, a multi-scalar GIS has been constructed focusing on the spatial locations of sites in the landscape, the alignment and orientation of burials, and tying together the results of the other 2 strands of research. The 3 strands together will be used to address how burial evidence reflects the sociocultural practices and identity of the inhabitants of Northumbria from a landscape perspective. So some of the questions that we're focused on are, what was the nature of migrations in this period, and how did it affect local and regional identity, political structures, and transformations in the landscape? How did cemetery locations reflect signaling of power structures, territorial expansion, competition, and/or control? How did Northumbria emerge from a Roman military frontier zone and a collection of smaller British polities into one of the largest of the early medieval kingdoms in Britain. And what was the social composition of the Northumbrian communities? And what does the burial record suggest about health variations, status, ethnicity, and migration in this period? In addition, people and place is working across modern national boundaries, incorporating data sets from regional authorities in both Scotland and England. Much of Northumbrian scholarship has focused on the core regions of modern-day Northumberland and Yorkshire, which are there and there, with archaeological research to the north and west of these regions often discussed using other interpretive frameworks. It is hoped that by bringing together the entirety of the extent of Northumbrian burial evidence, new avenues of inquiry can be addressed. So the remainder of this paper will discuss some of the preliminary results of the GIS analysis that reflect many of these themes. The project area was defined as to reflect the maximum possible extent of Northumbria and covers 23 historic counties in Scotland and England. Site locations were gathered from 27 historic environment record offices, as well as national site inventories of England and Scotland. This database was supplemented with sites identified in the published literature and unpublished grade literature of site excavation reports. And currently, our database includes the location of 667 sites related to individual burials, cemeteries, and find spots. Now, I just thought of this morning. When we started this project, we estimated we might have about 300. So we've far exceeded already what we were hoping to find. There are a number of environmental and evidence constraints on this data set based on archaeological visibility of early medieval sites and concentrations of archaeological fieldwork in certain portions of our study area. You can see, hopefully, kind of huge gaps of where there's no black dots. And some of those align with current national parks and have very limited archaeological research conducted in them due to permitting issues. But some of them, for instance, this whole area here, I think might be a misunderstanding of the archaeological evidence. I don't really understand why that gap is there, and that's something we have to really kind of focus on in the future. Now, while this is not a big data project due to the somewhat limited numbers, we are employing similar methods of gathering this data and analysis. As a data-rich project in the historic period, we face unique challenges of integrating archaeological, spatial, and historical data in our GIS, and comparing this data set to a variety of environmental data, including but not limited to geology and geographical data sets, pollen coring data, evidence of past forests and boggy areas, etc. Although we've spent much of the last year and a half gathering and correcting this locational data of sites in our geodatabase, preliminary distribution patterns have begun to emerge based on the attributes of the individual burials or cemeteries. These patterns have been identified through a series of proximity analyses focused on the relationship between burial locations, transportation networks, and the natural environment. The patterns are demonstrating the fluidity of practice in the study area, with some attributes of the burials found throughout Northumbria and others clustered in very specific regions, suggesting both long-held regional identity as well as broader practice of widespread ideas. So the image on the left demonstrates the overall distributions of our sites containing inhumations, cremations, or both. This basic distribution pattern shows that the overwhelming majority of our sites are located to the east of the Pennines, running up that way, which may be a reflection, of course, of archaeologists concentrating our research generally to the east of the Pennines themselves. As you can see, inhumation-only cemeteries dominate in our data space and are covering the whole extent of our area. Cremation-only sites, however, tend to be in the southern portion of our study area, with only a few outliers to the west of the Pennines and along the northern portion of the study area. Although the dating's kind of rough on these, we think these may be more late Roman than early Med at the moment. We're still refining our kind of time period. Mixed rite cemeteries are exclusively found in the south and to the east, except for a single outlier along the southern border. And that corresponds to the core Kingdom of Northumbria that made up Northumbria. The image on the right demonstrates the importance of waterways and some of the constraints for the locations of our sites in our database. River valleys are a known draw to early medieval settlement in the 5th and 6th century due to their importance as transportation routes. Although it is possible that these river valleys with their gravelly soils allow better visibility of some of these early medieval sites, the overall pattern suggests an importance of river valleys as a possible marker of territoriality, focused on settlement within these river valleys. Whilst the cremation and mixed rite cemeteries were primarily located in the southern portion of our study area, sites that contain at least one stone-lined grave, or a kissed grave, are found predominantly in the northern portion of our study area, with only scattered sites further south. Now, kissed grave sites make up approximately a quarter of the total number of our sites in our database. In contrast, the image on the right shows imported grave goods from continental Europe and what's today's southern England, with a much smaller 3% of the total. Almost all of the imported artifacts are found in the core area of Deira, in modern-day North and East Yorkshire, with many of the imported items Frankish in origin. The imports suggest a wide trade network for the southeastern portion of Northumbria, but raise important questions on the limited number of these finds in other regions. Now, the large-scale distribution of the sites convey the appearance of strong correlations between burials and the Roman road network. So sites were analyzed in comparison to the mapped network using a proximity analysis. 30% of the sites in our database are located within 500 meters of a road. Now, there was a significant difference in the proximity of sites to the north of Hadrian's Wall and to the south, with a much stronger correlation of burial sites to the south of the wall close to the Roman road network. Now, while this may indicate potential continuity of the importance of the road network from the Roman period onwards, it may also relate to the higher percentage of both sites and roads south of the wall. So, we decided to test two smaller areas. And also, the modern British highway system follows the route of most of the Roman road network. So we have these nice clusters along the road. Well, the last 20 years, there's been major road construction on the M1 and have turned up a ton of sites, which does skew a little bit this analysis. So we decided to test two areas, which are in the circled here, that are away from some of these British highways construction areas to see if there's any kind of similarities to the north and south of Hadrian's Wall. And what they found is that there's no significant difference in the distribution of proximity of sites in these two regions. Previous studies of southern Britain note a very strong correlation between the location of Anglo-Saxon burials and the Roman road network, with a proximity related to territoriality and control by burgeoning kingdoms in this period. Although there were many factors that affected the spatial locations and burials in this period, it appears that the Roman road network had a very strong pull on the location of burial sites throughout Northumbria, and that the network had a long afterlife in shaping the development of the kingdom. So building on the importance of movement for our analysis, we've conducted a cost surface and least cost path analysis in the Millfield Basin as a trial to test if there are natural corridors of movement in the landscape. The Millfield Basin along the modern English-Scottish border contains a large number of archaeological sites from the Neolithic through modern periods, with a relatively high number of early medieval settlements and burial locations. The overwhelming majority of early medieval settlement and burial locations were located within 500 meters of a historic floodplain boundary, along the low-lying valley floors. This contrasted with the prehistoric Roman period and later medieval sites, which have been recorded in both upland and lowland settings. Again, early medieval evidence as it is, potentially there are sites in the uplands that have not been recognized, but there is a very strong pattern of not finding anything in the uplands at the moment. So a least cost path analysis was run to model patterns of movement by testing the earliest paths to cross through the region, based on effort to traverse slopes and to avoid floodplains. These floodplains were based off Environment Agency records and correspond well to the maximum deposit of Holocene alluvium, demonstrating long-held kind of boundaries of these kind of low-lying floodplain areas. The results of the analysis indicate long-term upland and lowland routeways that focus on traveling through river valleys and stream valleys and crossing floodplains near historic fording areas as demonstrated on early 19th century maps of the region. It demonstrates a wide network of communications linking key early medieval settlements such as Yevering and Millfield to upland and lowland sites, and these appear to have served from the late prehistoric period through the medieval, suggestive of long-held patterns of transhumance and resource gathering. It demonstrates that the early medieval populations in this area potentially prized locations near rivers and floodplains where they were easily traversed, and placed their cemeteries and settlements accordingly to be near these crossing points and potentially to stake a territorial claim on these areas. So that's a bit of a whirlwind introduction to our project, but in conclusion, the GIS analysis is demonstrating the importance of location for understanding the formation of the kingdom and how routeways and movement corridors point to placement of cemeteries as key to staking claims and control on the landscape. Whilst this may be true, it also is showing regionally distinct trends in burial practice, suggesting long-held ideas on dealing with death that were very locally based. The database shows that the imported grave goods from other parts of Britain and the continent are clustered in the southeastern portion of the kingdom, whilst kiss graves are clustered in the north. But the overall importance of waterways, the road networks, and trends in inhumations across the area suggest broad-held ideas across the kingdom. Basically, it's a lot more complex than we imagined it to be. Now, this research is reinforcing that long and short distance mobility is a significant factor in the formation of Northumbria, both from within Britain and from migration from outside. And future scientific analysis of the data will add to our understanding of the individuals within these kingdoms. The GIS analysis, I think, shows that there are many similarities in Northumbria to the other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in Britain, but that there appears to be something unique going on here in the makeup of Northumbrian burials that implies a difference in how this kingdom and local identity were formed. Now, People and Places currently entering our final year of the project. With a completed geodatabase, more advanced spatial analysis will commence, and the results of the scientific analysis will be incorporated, drawing together those three strands of research I mentioned earlier. So thank you very much.